Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today it's Wednesday. It's September the 3rd, and thanks so much for joining me this morning or this afternoon, whenever you guys are joining on. Oh, yesterday, or I guess last week, was interesting. This week is going to be interesting as well. In addition to having the girlfriend of the FBI director seem to have some issues with this program, I've now been able to find out what James O'Keefe intended to do with the deposition that made me skip our show on July the 29th. He wanted to clip out about 20-something seconds so that people would understand that I don't talk dirty to my wife in a lawsuit about him being sued for breach of contract with his company that he worked for, and he countersued them for something about them hurting his feelings and finances. I'm not a party to the lawsuit. It's the dumbest thing you've ever seen. And so part of it was his attorneys, who, by the way, are from Childers Law. That's the same guy, Jeff Childers, who runs Coffee and COVID, who I don't have any beef with. But his attorneys, especially the ones that work for James O'Keefe, are just pieces of shit. They're just shitty people. And this guy was garbage. So he sat out there and they did this, like, what they thought was a gotcha question. Do I respect my spouse? If you guys have seen this on the internet, if you've seen it out on X, this is the push. And by the way, donate to James O'Keefe's legal fund so that he can ask people who are not working for the government questions. You know what they didn't put into that deposition? Of course, I have a full copy of it. The thing he didn't put into the deposition is they said, did you offer to fight with James O'Keefe? And I said, yeah, I did. In a boxing ring. Maybe we could raise some money for charity. So if any of you want to go ahead and encourage that, I would very much enjoy it. I have a 0-0-0 professional and amateur boxing record. No organized boxing experience whatsoever. And I'm willing to get in the ring with them. And then they wanted to go out and point out my height, my weight, and my reach. And I said, look, yeah, James O'Keefe has about 7 inches on me for height probably. And I'm sure he has reach on me. And he's got about 40 something pounds on me in weight. And I'm still willing to go in there. And the odds is that he will find himself badly beaten, really badly beaten. He's a wimp. He's always been a wimp. I found something kind of in common with the people that really have a big problem with me. They're unmarried and they're spouseless. Maybe if they had children in their lives and something to take that energy that they have, like whatever it is, they can make, do the thing that I do, like 10 o'clock at night. I have to get out of bed and go and put my kid on the toilet so that he pees, so he doesn't pee in his bed. Like dad stuff. Maybe if they had something to focus on outside of that, they'd be able to go. We've got a bunch of other interesting things to do, but it is not unrelated to what I just talked about. And if you guys recall, I've actually pulled this back up again. We talked about this on a Friendly Friday, this discussion of Plato's Republic and Socrates and the metaphor of the drones, a parasitic class of citizens who basically run around unchecked and they manipulate people politically. It's something to consider. We did this on one of our last Friendly Fridays before we lost Steve Friend to the FBI again. Just for those of you who are wondering, those guys have not been reinstated. My friends in the Bureau, I said, hey, I look for them on the link chat and they're not available. Nope, they haven't been reinstated yet. They're just waiting. They're waiting to be contacted by the FBI. So Director Patel, your HR people are slow, incompetent, as you'd expect. And they haven't been paid that back pay, which is all they got. There was no damages. The settlement included no damages. It was simply just saying, we're going to give you the money that we should have paid you in the first place because we should have never gotten rid of you. And they're taking their time to get to that. So you guys know all that stuff now. And I think that's relevant to, the broader discussion of our conversation. We're going to get into actors, bad theater. We're going to get into Epstein Files re-release, because why not? That's where we're at today. And that includes some of the bad actors. I guess Jerry Nadler, the midget penguin guy from New York, is no longer going to be hanging around in the Powers of Hall, or the Halls of Power. So I got a video of that. You're not going to actually, if you've never seen Jerry Nadler in person, if you've never seen him on video, I have maybe the funniest video that has ever been taken of any sitting, standing, unstooled congressmen. You guys will understand what I'm talking about in just a second. Before we get into the depth of the program, of which there's plenty, we'll talk about something called Emergency or National Emergency Preparedness Month. If you guys want to get yourself squared away, check out my friends over at My Patriot Supply. They're the folks that we use. This is the food stuff that we have stuffed underneath our closet that goes underneath the stairwell. It's National Preparedness Month in September. We have just begun, and so that's obviously a perfect time to ask yourself some questions like, hey, how much food do we have for an emergency? What if something were to happen? How would we get clean water if the tap went dry tomorrow, if suddenly everything was turned off? What would you do if the storm knocked out power for, let's say, a week? Would you be okay? Would everything spoil? Would you need critical medicines? Is there room for improvement in any of your preparations? And if so, you guys can check out my friends over at My Patriot Supply. They're running this month-long sale in order to help you get ready. Disaster preparedness is something we always talk about here. The prepare attitude, the mentality of getting things done before the emergency so you don't have to repair afterwards. It always costs you far more after the fact. They're going to give you $1,500 worth of emergency food and preparedness for free. You guys can buy a 1-year pack, so you can basically say, no matter what happens, I can load this up in a truck, I can load this up in my van, I can load this up in my car, and I can be mobile and moving around, and I can feed myself, which is one of the biggest things you're going to worry about in a survival scenario. It's air, it's water, and right after that comes food and shelter. All right, so check yourselves out there. Check out their preparedness mega kit if you guys want to look into that. It's a full year of food, and they're going to give you a bunch of stuff in there for free. Water filtration also in there. Just look and make sure that you have your bases covered. Many of you are already preparedness minded, but for those of you that have been putting it off, don't do it. You guys saw what happened during COVID. There were lines of people waiting for toilet paper and eggs and a bunch of other things. MyPatriotSupply.com/Kyle, MyPatriotSupply.com/Kyle. The full details are below, and you guys can click on that link in the show description. We're going to get into today's program. We're going to start off with a little bit of fun, I promise you. So I am going to start with fun, and this is the fun that I have. This is Representative Jerry Nadler. He will not be seeking re-election in 2026. I didn't look up how old Jerry Nadler is, and I feel like I should probably do that. We'll take a risk of asking the AI how old this guy is. What do you think? 78 years old, so it's probably about time for him to go. And also, I think he's 5 foot tall. He might be smaller. I've seen him stand on the street next to Austin Fleckis. If you guys have never seen Fleckis Talks, one of my wife's favorite shows, was one of my guys that kind of got me through the pandemic nonsense when he was going out and asking people questions with a microphone taped to a wooden spoon and had the proper amount of sort of disrespect for the thing that he was doing. But I didn't know how short he was, how small he was, how weird looking he waddles when he walks. And here he is giving some sort of speech about something, but he's behind the podium. If you guys are looking, what you're seeing is Dan Goldman on the screen because Jerry Nadler's forehead is only visible and it's covered by a microphone. I kid you not.
But these people are wearing masks and are totally unidentified. And the question is why? The question is why. It's completely improper. And again, one has to assume they're hiding something or they're hiding misbehavior because otherwise, why would they be wearing masks and denying their identities?
Oh, they're hiding their identity. This is talking about ICE agents who are involved in deportations. This is talking about people that are involved in Washington, D.C. And maybe the reason that they want to do some of that hiding is because there's a targeted effect of lunatic leftists doxing their families, coming after them personally, being in that hot seat. I know exactly what it's about. I'm not a big fan of having people come after me. That being said, if you're a federal agent and you serve the public, I'm not real crazy about you wearing a mask either. So I understand the instinct to do it, and there's probably no regulation against it. And we certainly can see the hypocrisy because we've watched people on the left do this for several years now, going back at least to 2020. Somehow everything about COVID changed the way that our normal social decorum works. I can't think of a single person, maybe one person who had cancer when I was growing up that would wear a mask if they were, like immune compromised. But generally speaking, if you're immune compromised, you just stay home. You don't expose yourself. Now you'll see people that are in your church, that are in your grocery store, that are walking around in public on the streets like a complete lunatic, like wearing a face mask, and you just think, what's wrong with you? I thought the same thing, by the way, when everybody was wearing them, and I think the same thing today and now. But they're really upset, because God forbid, the ICE agents are going to do it. Jerry Nadler was the longtime Democratic rep from New York. He said he's not going to seek re-election, said it yesterday, and he says, for more than 32 years, I've had the honor of serving The people of New York in the United States Congress, I'm announcing I won't be seeking re-election next year, and this term will be my last. This decision has not been easy. Why? Why was it not easy? You're 78 years old. You're like a devastated carcass of a human being that barely can move around. I know my heart's in the right place with this one. It's time to pass the torch to the next generation. No, that time actually happened probably like 15 years ago. But you stuck around anyway. So there you go. He's going to be gone. Kind of fun. And you'll notice he was worried about health, and he's worried about whether these people are doing the right thing in public. I guess that's also been something that Jen Psaki is particularly worried about. There's been this ongoing question. Was Donald Trump dead? Did you guys know about this? If you don't follow leftist media, you wouldn't realize that there was a trending topic over social media. Donald Trump wasn't seen for a couple days, apparently. I feel like we see him as much as anybody. He was supposedly dead. And so Jen Psaki got out there and decided to talk about it. But that's not it. NBC also ran a full piece on this. Trump, who questioned his opponent's health, rebuffed rumors about his own, and they're honing in on a picture of a bruise on the top of his right hand, which could be a bruise. It also could be a liver spot, which is a thing that people get at a certain age. Start melanin production. It may or may not be something that matters. Generally speaking, you'll see plenty of people over a certain age that start developing certain patches of skin that are darker than others, and we just kind of move on. Maybe it's a bruise, though. Maybe they drew blood from his hand. Maybe he bumped it into something. The older you get, the less elastic your blood vessels tend to be. So a little bit of a contusion is not totally out of range there. Who knows? Maybe he was beating his fist against the wall because he was furious with the stupidity of this country. I don't know, and you don't know. But he seems to be okay. That doesn't stop Jen Psaki from talking about it. We'll go into the quote-unquote conspiracy in just a second from this article, but let's hear this woman. For some reason, when I keep pulling these video clips, the audio and the video gets out of sync on some of them, and it's probably no more appropriate than watching this woman's face move without the right words. Here's Jen Psaki on MSNBC responding to her very big concerns about the health of the president. This is the former White House spokesperson for Joe Biden.
Really can't make this stuff up sometimes. And look, we may never know why Donald Trump's suddenly spent a week hiding entirely from the American public. But you don't actually need baseless online conspiracies to explain why he might not want to show his face in public right now. I mean, for starters.
Yeah, he doesn't want to show his face in public right now, even though he shows his face in public all the time. And he was seen golfing. He was seen golfing on Labor Day. And he was maybe 15 minutes away from the White House by helicopter. And all of that was very, very concerning. That was his 21st day playing golf this year. And again, within spitting distance of the White House when it comes to being able to jump into a helicopter. But that was a big, big concern. And then, of course, they had to cover it over on CNN as well. This is kind of funny because it pivots over to Tim Walz. Let me see if I can read any more of this conspiracy theory. People were asking, is he okay? How's he feeling? What's wrong? He says, I was very active this Labor Day, including golf outings at his club in Northern Virginia and repeated posts on social media, which we haven't seen any lack of those. And they seem to be very Trump-like, including things that I don't think are great. He seems to be a victim of his own ubiquity. He's in front of the camera so often that when he's not, people notice and they leap to conclusions that he's ill. This is really serious news reporting, folks. We're now reporting on the feelings of what people do on online social media conspiracies with trending topics like Trump dead. Meanwhile, as my buddy Steve Friend likes to describe him, that we had a human Roomba. If you've ever not seen a Roomba, if you're not familiar with sort of like the vacuum systems that people can have, maybe you've never bought one. I can understand that. We had one for a little while. They just sort of aimlessly bump into things, especially the generation 1 and 2. They would just drive straight in a direction and then they would hit something and then they would turn, pivot like 30 degrees and they hit something and they turn and pivot. And that's pretty much what we expected and saw from Joe Biden for 4 years. He would get up on stages. He wouldn't know where he was. He would start sentences and then he wouldn't finish them, a lot like a Roomba. The Roomba will like bump into something and then it'll just suddenly do like a 360 and drive off in the other direction. You know, that was our president for 4 years. And nonstop, we were told by that woman who was questioning whether or not Donald Trump was okay or alive, like that he was a superhero, that behind the scenes he was doing backflips, that he would do gymnastics, dunk a basketball, and then drink a latte while he was like shit talking all the people in the office because he was such a stud. They could barely keep up with him. He was so awesome. Kind of that vibe of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You remember that? Her workout is so intense, even though she's a 78-pound, 1,000-year-old lady. Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have fit like in my backpack and I could have jogged with her. But she was so powerful that a 20-something-year-old reporter couldn't keep up with her in the gym. You're like, why do you have to do this? And all of that goes back to these drones that I talked about. When you start enforcing tyranny, we need to have this like hero system. We did the same thing with the Trump administration when they came in. They were like, it's like the Avengers popping in. I did an interview yesterday, and I was reminded of that. It's RFK Jr., it's Tulsi Gabbard, right? Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, stepping in, getting justice for America. No, these people are people, and they don't always do a great job, and they certainly don't agree with everything that you would say, and they're certainly not the perfect representation for you. But there are obviously worse people, and there were obviously worse people, and it's always, I think there was this question about, how do you compare them? You just have to look at the alternative, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It was better. So you don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Sure. It sounds like people that are working on CNN, especially guys like Scott Jennings, who sort of seems to be carrying their programs, I think he's getting sick of it. So now they're going to start dropping profanities. I do remember a time when we were a decent society and you couldn't drop a profanity on network television. I guess we're beyond that now because there's Netflix and everything's out there. So everybody expects colloquial language. Look, I swear all the time in my real life, way more than I should. I should be much better about it. In fact, I'm regularly reminded when I talk to people that don't swear that I was an enlisted guy who worked in emergency medicine, and I've got something of a mouth on me. That's just the nature of who I am now, and I don't spend enough time working on it, and I probably should. I still think you could do better. I don't drop swear words when I go on network television. So maybe this is just a too colloquial at this point in time. Here's Scott Jennings. He's not wrong, because Tim Walz is garbage. And again, that was the alternative. Remember, Donald Trump has a bruise on his hand. Joe Biden didn't know where he was.
Scott Jennings, you had an opportunity to ask the president today about this, and you did not. Why?
Well, because when he got on the phone and sounded very much alive, I thought it would sound kind of stupid, frankly, to ask an alive person if they were dead. But I'll tell you who is a complete piece of shit. I'm going to tell you right now.
There have been a lot of swear words at this
Tim
table today.
Walz,
Okay.
the governor of Minnesota, holding up a phone in front of a rally saying, well, we thought we were going to wake up and find out the president had died. Someday it'll happen. Someday it'll happen.
Although I will say this, the last few days you woke up thinking there might be news. Just saying. There will be news sometime, just so you know, there will be news.
And I used to say he was the biggest buffoon in American politics, but it's worse now.
There's a lot of buffoons in American politics. They're on both sides of the aisles. We're going to be talking about some from both sides of the aisles today, including my favorite cocktail waitress turned congresswoman. But Tim Walz is a uniquely garbage human being. And he's decided to do the thing that almost all Democrats do, which is that when you have a tragedy that involves a gun in your state, then the best thing you could do is go out there and try to blame the gun. Not the person, not the mental illness, not the potential hormonal treatments they're getting, not the SSRIs, not bad parenting, not video games, not whatever it is. I don't know what it is. Neither do you. You don't have a specific cause of action. But I know it wasn't a gun because the gun has no agency. The gun is an inanimate object. There are guns sitting in this studio right now. I will point to one on the screen. Boop, right over there. Benelli shotgun, just hanging out. Affecting nobody. An assault shotgun, if you will. Combat shotgun, maybe. Over my shoulder. You'll see. There's a revolver there. There's another handgun over here. There's guns all over the place here. All of these things, by the way, I think the Benelli would actually fit into the category of assault something or other if you were in Virginia. And this one over here, there it is on this side, the Glock handgun. Yeah, that'll hold more than whatever their assault weapon ban goes on. In Virginia, if it's more than 20 rounds in a pistol, it becomes an assault weapon. If it can accept a 20-round magazine, I have 20-round magazines. That's an assault pistol. Not the problem. They always go after the inanimate object because that's what their base wants to hear about. We're going to hear more about that in Chicago because the crime in Chicago is really the fault of the surrounding red states. It's not the violent a-holes that actually live in Chicago that have no value for human life. That's not the problem. No. We're going to blame an inanimate object because otherwise we'd have to talk about how our voters are actually garbage and they continue to have garbage policies. Here's Tim Walz. Why don't we just be more like Australia? By the way, I saw a march in Australia for like white nationalists or something like this. They were just basically like Australians for Australia or something to that effect. And they went in and they clashed with these Antifa guys and just beat the ever-loving crap out of them. And it was very therapeutic. That's how I kind of started my morning here. Here's Tim Walz saying, why don't we just take away all the guns? Because it would just be fine. These people all swore an oath to the Constitution. I thought they just don't understand it.
When they had a school shooting in Scotland or they had an incident in Australia, they simply made changes. They are just as free as we are. They still have gun ownership requirements, but they have made sure that they don't have these. And since they did those things, they don't have them. We are an outlier amongst nations in terms of what happens to our children, and I refuse to think that that's okay. It's simply not.
Oh, good. So that's not okay. It's not okay for us to have guns because even though they swore allegiance to something, I continue to believe that historical ignorance is one of the biggest problems that we have in this country. I don't know any other way around it. People do not understand the mechanism by which our government operates. They don't understand the responsibilities that exist in that government. They're willing to blame people for something that is maybe 100 years old or some trend that's ongoing. We're going to have a clip from Ben Shapiro in a minute talking about sort of the creep of the executive. And Ben Shapiro says for the last 20 years, we've had a creeping executive. That's not true. My entire life, probably all of your lives as well, people have looked at the chief executive of this country, the president, as being sort of a king-like figure. It's a king for a period of time. But that's not how our Constitution is drafted. And if you knew that, and if you understood the context around it, then you wouldn't think those things. I was on a podcast yesterday, and it reminded me of something that we've talked about here before. There was a court case that was done, if my memory serves, 2020. You guys can check me in the chat. Chiafalo versus Washington, Supreme Court case law, came down and reminded the American people, even though they didn't listen and they didn't hear it, that you, as an individual citizen, have no plenary right to elect the president of the United States of America. We'll say that one more time. You have no right in the United States, under any federal law, and certainly not under the Constitution. You have no right to elect the president. And why would that be? Because the founders of this country didn't view that as being the primary and the original most powerful branch of government. We have a legislator, even if it's now composed of cocktail waitresses and like pants crapping midgets. That's the case. Article 1 defines the powers of the legislator. And we have a bicameral system. There's supposed to be two houses. One of them represents you directly. That is your congressman. If you live in New York and you're in Jerry Nadler's district, that's Jerry Nadler. The Penguin is your rep. So be it. Which is why if you can't get that person out for 32 years and you live there, why do you live there? If you live in Minnesota and you can't get rid of their bad policies because they continue to do it. If you live in Chicago and it's been like this forever, 100 years, maybe you ought not to be in Chicago if that's not your values. And if it is, then we know what it stands for to live there. We know what it means. That's the House of Representatives. They're supposed to represent you directly. And then you have the Senate. And we changed this in 1913. And I'm going to keep beating on this because we can't talk about the problem being new when the problem is well over 100 years old. In 1913, we passed the 16th and the 17th Amendment. We gave the federal government primacy over the states. That never happened before. The minute that they could raise their own money, they created the Federal Reserve, they created the IRS. All of these things allowed our federal government to step in over the top of the states. We are supposed to be a United States where the states are the functional unit, but we're not. And that Senate is supposed to represent the states. The state houses, more specifically, your state legislature, whatever its majority is supposed to appoint your senators. But we changed that, and now you get to directly elect them. So now you have this nasty thing where if you've got big population centers, even though the majority of the physical area of your state, the majority of the state districts vote one way, you can have it overrun by a population base like New York City or like Dallas or like Chicago, even if the rest of the state votes for red representatives in the state house. They can overrun you. And that was more democratic. And democratic institutions were the thing that our founders were trying to avoid because they built a republic. It's the same reason why you hear Democrats regularly, repeatedly, often trying to get rid of the Electoral College. If you guys remember this, you probably do. You go through elementary school, you go through middle school, they're teaching you about basic things about how does the American federal government work. This is like your Civics 101 when you're a child. And they kind of refer to the Electoral College as a vestigial thing. It's like having a tailbone. Well, we don't have tails anymore, so why do we have a tailbone? It's not vestigial. It was a check against the mob. It was supposed to filter down so that the majority of the state houses were the ones who actually picked your president, who was supposed to be the number 2 to the legislator. How crazy is it that we've completely turned that on its head? Your chief executives are supposed to only have power locally. Mayors, governors, they're supposed to be the most powerful people. The president is supposed to be sort of like a representative of what the majority of the state houses in the country wanted. If you guys realize that, and that's who has the ability to put the electors forward into the Electoral College, tomorrow, every single red state could repeal their law saying that you have a right to vote for president. They could remove the general election, and they could pick the president tomorrow for the next election. Do you know that? Or they could pick the electors at least. How crazy is that? And the Supreme Court said this. You guys can check my math on this, but go read the decision. The plenary power for picking electors remains in the state houses, and they can give it or take it away. And they've given it to you in every state, but they don't have to. Anyway, these chief executives locally, if they have certain ideas, and if you happen to live in Minneapolis, they do have certain ideas. Maybe you don't want to live in Minneapolis. I don't know anybody that does. And my friends that have guns, they've all left Minnesota. If they have gun businesses, they are looking at doing that specifically. If you're in Minneapolis and you run a gun business, you're nuts. If you're in the surrounding areas, I'm sorry that you live in a place that used to be America. It used to be that places like Wisconsin and Minnesota, you could look around and go, yeah, many of the unions kind of run the politics in the cities, but at the end of the day, we're still free Americans. And more, that is not the case. Here's the same guy that we showed you a couple days ago crying at the golden casket of George Floyd, talking about assault weapon bans on the backs of dead children, because that's what we do in this country. And then I'm going to show you that this crime is certainly sort of intentional when you look at the way that people who live in these cities get a chance to do something about it. What do they do about it? And we're going to cover down on that in just a second, because we're seeing, I've heard of jury nullification. I've never heard of grand jury nullification. And I think we're seeing that in Washington, D.C. right now. So another thing that the Trump administration has to fight. Here we go.
So we have had bans on assault weapons nationally before. That ban then expired. And so it's not as if this is some unique thing that has never been tried. Other countries have had mass shootings. And then rather than sit on their hands, they have made the move to ban assault weapons so that kind of thing doesn't happen again. The only difference is we haven't made that move in decades. And so we're in the position to do it now. Are there logistics that need to be worked out just like any piece of legislation? Of course there are. Of course there are. But we got to have the argument, we got to take the necessary steps, and we're in the position now to act.
Can you be more specific about, assault weapon is a fairly arbitrary term that would need to be defined. You're talking about banning certain models, certain assaultive features. Speak to how you're defining assault weapons.
Right. Generally speaking, we're talking about guns and devices that are built to be assault weapons and or devices that are built to shift non-assault weapons to be able to reel off a whole bunch of bullets all at once. And we've seen both of those in our city.
So what I'm going to tell you is that the reason that it's called an assault weapon is because I called it an assault weapon and it has assault weapon features, but I don't need to define the term assault weapon because assault weapon means assault weapon. These people have absolutely no understanding about what they're talking about. This is how you end up with clowns talking about it's the shoulder thing that goes up for a barrel shroud, whatever the hell that thing is. There's a barrel shroud on the freaking shotgun I've got over there. It's pretty common in shotguns. It keeps you from getting burned. It's a safety feature. These people have no idea what it is they're looking at. It's a pistol grip. It allows you to shoot it faster from the hip. Have any of these people ever shot a weapon? We know that Tim Walz can't even load his own shotgun, but he's a hunter. All of this stuff is nonsensical. If you have to use the term in the definition for the term, then there is no definition for the term. This is the same reason why Matt Walsh had really good success with what is a woman. They defined the term woman with the word woman. It's someone who feels like a woman. Well, what is that thing? It's someone who identifies as a woman. Well, what's a woman? A woman is something that a woman knows when a woman is a woman. Nonsensical. An assault weapon has assault weapon features. Oh, well, can you be real specific? She even asked like a pretty reasonable question, even though it's a dumb question to have to define. We've had assault weapon bans in this country. Yeah, and we've also seen the data, and it doesn't freaking work. Donald Trump had a different solution to this, by the way, which leans towards liberty. This is kind of the first time I've heard him say this. Arming the teachers. You know what? I've met a lot of teachers. Some of you can handle weapons, and some of you cannot. And some of you think you can, and you shouldn't. And I'm okay with that idea. He talks about people who are veterans. Just because you're a veteran, by the way, just because you carried a gun for a living doesn't mean you know how to use the gun. Go look at the accuracy details in police shootings. Go look at the accuracy of like how many of our troops shoot and how they qualify. There are people that know how to use weapons and there are not. And it is not a mutually exclusive category. The word veteran does not instantly grant you the ability to shoot. Just like the word police officer doesn't mean that you know anything about the gun that you carried. I oftentimes found it was actually the opposite of that. But that being said, qualified people in schools who can carry a weapon because they have chosen to, there's a very specific group of people that are self-selecting to carry a weapon. If you're a guy like me working in a school, carrying a weapon system is a massive deterrent, especially if we give them a little bit of time. Maybe you give them 1 day a month to go and do training. Maybe you actually do the same thing that you do with like the flight deck officer system. We haven't had a vehicle, an aircraft hijacked in a long time. Turns out that if intermittently some of the members in the cockpit might be armed and you are not, and you have a box cutter, and they're going to put like a SIG 226 to your face, maybe things are a little bit different. Why do I say that? Because I know a pilot who carries a SIG 226 for some reason. There are options. So Donald Trump, good on him. I like this. He talked about doing concealed carry reciprocity across the country. I hope it includes constitutional carry, which is what I use, because nobody should have to have a permit to exercise liberties that pre-exist the freaking government.
We have great teachers that love our children. The parents love the children. Teachers love the children, too. And if you took a small percentage of those teachers that were in the military, that were distinguished in the military, that were in the National Guard, et cetera, and you let them carry, that's something that a lot of people like. I sort of liked it.
He's not real specific. I sort of liked it. It's sort of okay. It's not the greatest idea, but it might work. Yeah, I don't know. Give it a shot. Sure. Open it up to the states. If we're going to put federal funding behind something, I'd rather be that than like some sort of stupidity on studying assault weapons. We're talking about protection. We can talk about yourself, talk about protecting yourself. It doesn't always have to be with a firearm. There's a lot of ways that you could be compromised. One of the ways you could be compromised is if somebody has access to your data. Yeah, they could show up at your house. That would probably be a bad idea for many of you who are gun owners. But they also could scam you out of your precious treasure, out of your personal information. They can abuse your credit. If you guys want to protect yourself, you can go to patriot-protect.com/KYLE, patriot-protect.com/Kyle. There is a link below here. There are always news of hacks that are happening. They're happening on a regular basis. They're happening from state actors. They're happening from commercialized groups of scammers overseas, and they're actually happening locally as well. And then people can buy your stuff on the dark web. If you want your personal information to be scrubbed so that you are not an easy target, this includes things like your name, your address, your phone number, and more from these data search websites. There are more than 100 people search websites, and they sell your data specifically so that people can find you. I've used these searches. They're very effective. I've used them very recently. They're actually a pretty common tool for me. If you don't want to be in them, you can have them removed. And that's what Patriot Protect does. The second thing they do is they scan the dark web where people are selling information like your email address, your phone number, your credit activity, your social security number, and so on. You can find out if you are being trafficked and sold in that way, and you can go ahead and take steps to mitigate those things. But you don't know you're under threat unless you understand that your stuff has been sold. Check out Patriot Protect. It's like $8 a month or less. Use my name at checkout so you save 15% on the annual subscription. It's a fire and forget thing. You punch it in and then you move on. Patriot-protect.com/KYLE. You guys, you've heard us talk about this quite a bit. This is a system. It'll also cut down on a lot of the robocalls because it just pulls your name out of that pile of garbage. Let's talk about people who apparently want to live in the status that guy wants to take your guns from. They want to live in higher crime. I still have this instinct that using the federal government to solve criminal activity at the local level is not a good one. But I have never seen this, and this is the reason why the people of Washington, D.C. want what they have. Just like I have to believe the people that live in Minnesota, at least the bulk of them, are voting and wanting the things that they have. This story was actually pretty wild. This is from Scott McFarland, which is kind of funny because we played him yesterday, and like I said, he has a hard time filling out like a regular dress shirt. Maybe he should get some custom skinny shirts, something, or maybe he should shrink them down in the wash. What happened to the criminal case of Nathalie Rose Jones facing criminal charges in the D.C. federal courts? It was not typical. The grand jury in Washington, D.C. had citizens deny the DOJ's request to indict Jones, who was accused of a federal crime, allegedly posting on Instagram a threat against Donald Trump. Now, I'm not a big fan of going after people for posting threats online, particularly really dumb ones when they have no ability to do it. There is a concept of true threat doctrine. Maybe these people are really, really well versed in what is and what is not a true threat, and whether it's just political speech and hyperbole. But I do think we should have the ability to be much more free in our speech, and we should be much less litigious. And I certainly don't think if you say something stupidly threatening where you have no ability to do it, that you should be arrested by our federal government, and we should be wasting our money and our dollars on that. The threat was pretty goofy. But the grand jury didn't even give an indictment. Now, you guys understand that an indictment is one of the lowest levels. There just has to be probable cause to believe that something happened. Is it more likely that there was a federal crime than not? And can we pursue? Jury nullification almost always is when the jury walks in and says, we don't like the way that you charge this case, so we are going to all agree that regardless of what you present, we are going to get rid of this charge. That is usually like something that you see, as I understand it, in like the OJ verdict, where it was like, well, they presented enough evidence, but the jury decided that we're not going to take one of our own. You can't have OJ Simpson. Grand jury nullification is not common. There is an incredibly high rate of returning what are called true bills in the grand jury system. You can usually bring the case. You may not be able to get it past an actual criminal jury when it comes to trial. But this is one of 4 instances that have happened in Washington, D.C. in the past week. And so that is a turn that tells you the people of Washington, D.C. are interested in doing one thing specifically, and that is not going along with what the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Washington, D.C. is doing. A former prosecutor this said, not only have I never heard of this happening, I've never heard of a prosecutor who's ever heard of this happening. I also have never heard of this. The return rate for federal agents going in and getting grand jury indictments is basically 100%. I don't know people that go in there who don't have the case. And the reason why is because they have the facts laid out, and it's a very, very low standard. This woman is accused of posting the following on Instagram. She said, quote, I am willing to sacrificially kill this president by disemboweling him and cutting out his trachea with Liz Cheney and all of the affirmation present. I don't know what Liz Cheney and the affirmation means. I don't know how she thinks she's going to cut out anybody's anything. All of that sounds nonsensical, right? That's not a true threat. That might be truly mentally ill, but it's not a true threat. They interviewed her and she said, yes, she believes that the president is a terrorist and a Nazi. Those are also protected speech. Why you would say that to the United States Secret Service is beyond me. Probably not well in the head. They refused to indict this woman because she, quote unquote, threatened to kill the president of the United States. So the District of Columbia's United States Attorney, which is Janine Pirro, she's incensed by this. She traveled and did some sort of like some protest, but she didn't carry a weapon. She didn't have a gun. She probably didn't have the ability to, carry any of this stuff out. This is strong stuff. They also didn't invite this guy, Sean Dunn, who was a Justice Department employee who threw a sandwich at a federal agent. They said, no, we're not going to do it. DOJ came back, charged him with a misdemeanor. That was probably the right thing to do in the first place. That definitely wasn't a felony. Felony sandwich throwing is silly. So we're in this moment where people sitting in the crowd are hearing that they are not going to participate in the system, and they're not even going to play nice enough to give an indictment. And that is a change. There are multiple other little examples here. People who are accused of swinging arms and bumping into officers, or they're getting, they're being charged with force or assault on a federal officer. Let's be really, really, really clear. In my experience, and from the experience of friends that I have that have worked all up and down the border, we regularly, the FBI would investigate Border Patrol agents getting assaulted. And the burden was pretty high. It usually had to be some sort of physical, notable injury, cut, scratch, bruise, broken bone, hospitalization, doctor treatment required, medical records that you could substantiate. Regularly, they would turn down other things, like scuffles to take people into custody where you scraped up your knee because you were on the ground and they were on the ground. They would just consider that to be part of the job. United States Attorney's offices did not take those on very regularly. We had a great example of a Border Patrol agent who got knocked over by a subject he was trying to get into cuffs, and it broke his sunglasses. And he was really upset about that. So he asked for an AFO. We did the investigation. We bring the complaint forward. We go, here's the fact pattern. You brief it to the AUSA, and they say declined. So that's pretty common. A sandwich throwing is likely declined in any serious office, unless you're trying to make an example. And I don't get mad about them trying to make an example in Washington, D.C. Let's be real clear. It's not that strong. It's not a strong case. It's not serious. So we should be real fair about that. Now, there is a strong case to be made that the Alien Enemies Act, which Stephen Miller argued, was the right way to get rid of a bunch of drug cartels that are doing work in this country. Yesterday, the Trump administration released an unclassified video. This is Pete Hegseth. This is the DOD's move. They've decided they are going to actually treat TDA, this criminal gang that's out of Venezuela, in a criminal way. And they're going to treat them as terrorists. Now, what do we do with terrorists? We usually put a drone up, we put an aircraft up, we surveil them, we watch them. When they do something that is threatening the United States, then we end them. And they did that very successfully for a long time under the Obama administration. The droning program was pretty clear. This is pretty neat. Neat footage. Probably not what these guys thought their day was going to go like. What you're seeing is unclassified thermal surveillance from some sort of ISR platform. It's not clear what. It's listed as unclassified. They struggle with the munition from above, aerial munition, no more boat. This is a looks like 3 to 4 engine, high-speed boat going across the open sea, bringing supposedly drugs, that's what we're told, fentanyl and other things, and it just gets smoked, which reminds me, like I think Steve Baker put it out on X the other day, this is kind of like that movie Clear and Present Danger. Like, hit him where it hurts. You hit him in the supply line before it ever gets to the United States, but we should be real. There are many people who want to do these drugs. The demand side is not going away. And so they will continue to undertake risks and go through the open ocean and play ball with the United States military. If they continue to do this, by the way, it's going to become impassable. They're going to have to go over land routes where they're going through population centers, so we don't do this. But if you're going to take it overseas, you're going to be in the place where the United States owns the air and owns the water. Bye-bye. Smoked. And, you know, it's kind of rewarding to see it. Yeah. Are there a number of human lives that are snuffed out? Yeah. Are they doing something that is a threat to the United States? As we saw from that Harrison Ford movie, right? They represent a clear and present danger. Once you declare something like that, game on. And if you're going to call them enemies, you might as well treat them like real enemies. You might as well actually try to keep that up. That doesn't mean the courts are going to go with you. And they don't. So here you have it. A federal court has decided to block Trump's removal of alleged Venezuelan gang members under the wartime enemies law. This is the thing that we started talking about right at the beginning, just as we got started in the Trump administration. And we are back to doing that nonsense again. So now we're in the appeals circuit because it never really stops. And all of this stuff indicates to me that the executives in the places where it happens and the people that are funding this lawfare, they want this. Like, they want this nonsense. They want more drugs in their communities. They want more unrest. They want people to be unsafe. They want things to be stupid so they can come in and offer ridiculous solutions. There's a guy right now, we've talked about him before, Zoran Mandami. He's running for mayor, logically. Yesterday, I played Curtis Sliwa, so I'll play one of the other people who's running. Sliwell's like the Republican candidate for mayor. He's been around in New York for a long time. He was wearing the red beret and doing sort of kung fu or karate in the subways and trying to clean up the act, and people understood that. But, you know, it's from a different time. But he was making an awful lot of sense about cutting things like government programs that have show up and do nothing jobs. And then you got this guy, and he's basically promising like a king. I will tell the evil lords what they can charge you or not. The lords being the people who are landlords that actually own property. If you live in a place that is rent stabilized or rent controlled like New York City, all that tells me is that it is an unsustainable market, that the market will bear more than you can handle. And if they can't figure out that, hey, we probably need like quarters for people who work at the CVS or the Dwayne Reeds as they have in New York City. If we don't have the ability to have like folks who are going to work at a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A or a Chipotle, if we can't actually offer enough for people to survive and work in this city for a wage that does it, then the city is basically unsurvivable. You can't do it through government fiat. This is a guy who is a socialist campaigning to go and take over America's biggest city, and all of his programs are bad, including the idea that we're going to freeze rent on 250,000 of privately owned residences where people would have to live. Rent control is crazy and stupid for people who have never lived around. If you think that is normal, if you live in a city where you're like, yeah, obviously they don't have to do rent control, how else could people afford it? Move immediately. Go to America where they have a free market. You will find out. House prices go up and they go down. Rentals go up and go down. They're based on supply and demand curves. There might be some other stupidity involved as well. But generally speaking, if you have to control rent, and there's a possibility that if your family lives in the house long enough, and this comes from some family experience on my wife's side, from the 1950s, that you can get 1950s rent in 2025, you live in a crazy place. And you shouldn't live there. Here's Mondami.
And that is why, as your next mayor of this city, I will freeze the rent for more than 250,000 rent-stabilized apartments.
I don't know who the dummies are that are cheering for that. I mean, it was only like 2 or 3, and they did sound like they were like women who don't understand how basic things work. They probably don't understand what the Constitution means. They probably don't understand how markets work. I imagine that their grasp of economics is low because they're excited about a 33-year-old socialist who was a former garbage rapper and doesn't really have any sort of experience. But if that's your thing, you probably don't understand. And you should leave. You should not be around where those people's vote counts as much as yours. I would never live in a place that, when I tell you that the places are not America, they mean that they're places that Kyle Seraphin and family cannot live. I wouldn't take my kids there. I wouldn't trust their bad policies. I wouldn't trust their policing. I wouldn't trust their inability to allow citizens to defend themselves. I don't go places where you can't own guns that I own and not have to ask questions and permission from the state. And I recommend the same for you, because it's really scary. These people, they don't live on the same plane of reality, as far as I can tell. We're going to take a deep breath. We're going to play a Spotify ad right here for those of you who are listening on the audio. Thanks for listening through these, or skip them, whatever. But there's your warning. Heads up. I want to move on to the Chicago program. So if New York is screwy, and New York has been better or worse for most of my life, there were times when it was really bad. Giuliani came in and cleaned it up, and they actually cleaned up the subways, and they did the broken window pane policing, and suddenly people realized that there was some pride in being a New Yorker, and it became a really safe city, relatively speaking, for a big city in America. And then there's places like Chicago, which I recall being kind of dangerous most of my life. Certain neighborhoods are certainly out of control. Somebody told me that the mayor actually lives in the worst neighborhood, Austin, that I constantly see. And that may be the case. But he also has like a multiple, armed local agent police detail that will keep him safe. So it's nice. It's nice to be the local king. I like seeing people push back on this guy, Brandon Johnson, and I'm going to play you some side by side. He used to think that crime was just crime. And now he's going to blame Republicans because they have a scapegoat. And all of this is the same garbage theater. I see a parallel between the theater about guns and the theater about crime and whether or not the federal government should come in and fix it and so on and so forth. And the same theatrics we're seeing about the Epstein file release, which of course was front page on all the news. And we're going to hit that in a second. And it's done by equally unserious people, in my estimation. Here's the current mayor of Chicago, like one of America's, 5 or 6 biggest cities. And he's just being accused blatantly of being a racist, which is kind of refreshing.
Justice is finally investigating your race hustle. As someone who grew up on the south side of Chicago, I've heard a lot of race hustlers in my life, trust me. But they were usually marching around outside of City Hall, which is what makes this so embarrassing and dangerous. Very, very dangerous to the city of Chicago.
Okay, we need the question.
I'm more than happy to ask this question. It's long overdue. For over a year, real Chicagoans, white and black, have been telling me that your black power rhetoric is bringing the city backwards from a place that
we need the question.
Had overcome. You want the question?
Please.
Real Chicagoans want to know, why are you a racist?
So that's a pretty good question. They don't answer it. He says, that's not a serious question. We're not going to answer it. How about things like this, though? These are from his actual speeches.
Are you prepared to defend this land that was built by slaves, a land that was built by indigenous people, a land that is built by workers? Are you prepared to defend this land? The people united will always prevail. I need you all to stand firm, to stand strong. If this president decides to continue to break this Constitution.
Oh, they're going to break the Constitution? That the city of Chicago was built by who was it again? By slaves and indigenous people? That's weird. I seem to remember being also in middle school and learning about the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Maybe some of you also remember that. And they blamed a cow. Catherine O'Leary's cow supposedly knocked over a lantern. It turns out it might have been a drunken Irish woman who was looking for a beer. So what? It was built up mostly by immigrants to this country, people who were hungry for a future, and there was a city that burned to the ground, and so they were able to build it back up. It turns out that your history is a little bit flawed, and that's probably the same reason why you don't actually know anything about the Constitution. You're the mayor of a major city, and you are invoking race and race hustling, and it's Donald Trump's fault. Turns out when you were campaigning for mayor, Joe Biden was in office. So you didn't have that scapegoat, and we heard very different words. Here's Brandon Johnson against Brandon Johnson.
We can actually solve crime in the city of Chicago with my plan. We will never be able to end gun violence in Chicago as long as the president continues to allow tens of thousands of guns to be trafficked into our state and our city.
Why does the president have anything to do with guns being sold in other places? And then you go look at the crime rates that are in other places, that are in the surrounding states, and they're not the problem. What do they just like smuggle guns into Chicago just so they could just watch young black kids shoot each other? Is that the goal? That's a hell of a claim. That is a race baiting claim. So that's all nonsensical. Ben Shapiro seems to have a pretty honest take about this. He's over on the CNN panel. You know, Ben Shapiro is very bright. For those of you who don't like him, I don't really care. Sometimes I agree with him and sometimes I don't. You can be right about two things. There is the concept that federal rule and coming in with the National Guard is not a great plan long term. And it's not even a great plan that you have to go there in the first place. But what it does indicate to me is that if the federal government has to step in, why do we not just accept that Chicago wants this? And people who live in Chicago, they basically want this. And if you live in Chicago and you don't want this, you have a choice. The overwhelming number of people in your city continue to put people in with terrible policies, and they tell you exactly what they mean by it. So you have to leave. There's all these folks that make excuses for people that stick around and, oh, I'm behind enemy lines and I'm resisting. You are physically giving money. You are one of the providers of financing for the thing that you hate. You got to square that with yourself. I don't understand how people do it. I've always voted with my feet. And in America, you can do that still, for now. If that's no longer an option, then maybe you got a different situation. And I'm going to tell you why I think that's really important, because Florida is the example, and it was the example because of COVID, and it was the example because of the tyrannical insanity that happened in New York City. So we're talking about major cities. When people vote with their feet, the policies go to the places where they want, and they reinforce those good policies versus really bad ones. I'm going to play you a clip from the Chuck Todd podcast that actually sort of illustrates that. First, Ben Shapiro making the argument, I think, against the National Guard as a general rule.
What is to stop that, Ben?
I mean, I think that, to be fair, the exertion of more power by the executive branch has been an ongoing process for the course of the last 20 years minimum. And you saw the Obama administration declare national emergencies, something like 12 national emergencies under President Obama, something like 9 under Joe Biden. Now you've had President Trump declare a wide variety of national emergencies. This isn't a unilateral problem. I think it is a bilateral problem. With that said, I think that we should separate a few strands here. One is the legal that Eli was talking about. One of the other things here, though, is I think what Van was referring to, which is President Trump does have a habit of wrong-footing his political opponents in a unique way on this sort of stuff. There were 574 murders in Chicago last year. And you can make the argument, I think a plausible argument, that National Guard troops should not be on the ground enforcing crime, both legally and just as a matter of general policy. But if the position you end up taking is that there is no serious crime emergency in Chicago on a rhetorical level, not on a legal level, on a rhetorical level, or you make the case that actually crime in Chicago just isn't that big of a deal, which seems to be the mistake that many Democratic politicians are making right now, Trump is going to win that battle all day long.
I mean, I hear you, but I also think there is the rhetorical level, which we could focus on. But I mean, I also want to focus on the reality, like the actual things that are happening. And even to that point, I mean, voters are not, I think we treat voters as stupider than they are. Mm-hmm. You ask them in polls and they say, we think crime is a problem. We don't like the way Trump is handling it in the way that he is sending the National Guard. They want Trump to do more about crime. They don't necessarily want him to send troops to cities. So voters can handle these topics.
I was grabbing this just because I wanted to see, can voters really handle this topic? And the fact of the matter is, I don't think they can, based on the numbers and based on the year-on-year data. The people in Chicago either don't turn out understanding what the problem is, or maybe they just don't actually have a real voice. Because if you're voting for this, I think you're nuts. Almost 77% of the victims of homicide are Black, and almost 20% are Hispanic. So for all of their rhetoric about, oh, it's all about it's bad people hurting minorities. No, it's minority victims. And overwhelmingly, when they actually find someone who's involved in the attacks, they're also people who look just like them who are doing the killing. And it's certainly not police-involved shootings. That's not what's going on. You can look. You heard defund the police, and they were talking about that very seriously in Chicago. Here's 2025 police-involved shooting stats. We can go back to 2009 and see the number of total. 2009, there were 19 killed in police-involved shootings with 42 wounded. Right now this year so far, it's 6 killed and 7 wounded. And overwhelmingly, those numbers keep going down. You've never seen more than, looks like 2011, Barack Obama years. Oh, where's he from? Chicago? Okay. 2011, you had 23 police shootings that resulted in a death and 37 woundings. That was a pretty big year. but most of them are single digits, especially in the last like 8 or 9 years. So it's not the cops. This is the citizens of that city doing crazy things to themselves. And what's crazy is you could look at the homicide trends from 1957 to 1954. By the way, this is Hey Jackass. If you guys don't go to Hey Jackass, I used to sit on surveillance and watch this when I was still in the FBI. I would still just like pour over these crime statistics, and they're shocking. Every single mayor outside of Eugene Sawyer, who was only mayor for 2 years, had north of 1,000 homicides on their watch. And in 2 years, it was just shy of 1,000. It was 978. That was from 1987 to 1989. This is a historically long-running 50 to 75 year long problem, maybe 100 years. So when you hear Ben Shapiro say, the executive has been moving this route for a very long time, and the executive, has slowly been growing, at least in the last 20 years. No, the executive has been growing at least since 1913, but we know in a big, big way that it took a huge jump in 1946 with the Administrative Procedures Act when the legislature ceded its authorities. So if the legislature is not going to solve problems, and I don't think this is a national problem, but if they're not going to do it, I do see people wanting to be safe. They should at least be safe enough to pack their U-Hauls up and get the hell out of Chicago. That's my take on it. That's what I have to say about that. And I hope they do. Honestly, I hope they don't. I don't want anybody to live in this crap, and neither should you. Let's talk about other nonsensical things that are going on. This is sort of the last little piece. Again, this was the main topic that was on all of the websites. I think it's sort of silly, and I'm going to point to you why I think it is silly. And then we're going to go into the voting with your feet, which I'm going to end with that as the argument here. But Epstein survivor says his impact on her is clear from her high school yearbook. This is a story that came directly out of CNN's coverage. Yesterday, the House released 33,000 plus files from Jeffrey Epstein's case investigation. And ridiculously enough, the spokesperson who was out there representing this is Anna Paulina Luna. I don't think she has a suitable background to be an elected representative, but that just means something about the district that represents her, or that she represents, rather. It doesn't say anything about me. It doesn't say anything about Congress other than we've got a lot of really poor actors, and so she's sort of pretty, so that's what we go with. That's an interesting move. They're going to have somebody who doesn't understand a lot and apparently can't read, as far as I can tell, because I feel like this situation was already put to bed. For many of the women that were victimized by Jeffrey Epstein, their lives are divided into two parts: before and after they sexually abused. They go over the story of a woman named Ashley Rubright, who had friends that met Epstein. She didn't know the stark differences until she looked back, and she saw that her yearbook showed that when she was, before meeting him, like 14, had a great summer, let's chill, let's hang out, like kind of like 14-year-old things. And then the year after she met Epstein, she's got things that said like, really worried about you. Don't do anything stupid this summer. Want to see you at the end, at the end of the summer when you come back next year. And so people were worried about her either suicidal or self-harming or other things. Yeah, that's what abuse looks like. Sure. We can talk about that. To talk to those victims and think that they were not talked to previously is sort of silly. And to get multiple statements from a congresswoman that seem to be completely devoid of like the historical facts, not of 100 years ago, not devoid of like understanding how the Constitution works or how the amendments have changed the structure of our federal government. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a couple of weeks ago, there was a memo released by the DOJ. Some of you guys were around when that happened, right? That was on, I just took a picture of it. So we're going to go through the memo and what it specifically said. But first, let's hear what a U.S. Congresswoman who was part of the release of this file, again, theatrical rollout, bread and circuses, distractions for the crowd, laser pointer, call it what you want, cat chasing the dot. Here she is telling you, super important that we investigate, and it might even be a criminal matter. I've got two different clips over here. Here's one where she was cornered inside the Capitol.
The biggest thing that stands out to me is the victims themselves have stated that this is a lot bigger than I think anyone anticipated. We are obviously going to be requesting the SARS reports from Treasury, and also too following up on that. There are some very rich and powerful people that need to go to jail. I think everyone's been frustrated as to why that hasn't happened before. But it is very much so a possibility that Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset working for our adversaries. But also, too, I think the questions that we have is how much did our own government know about it? And so there's more to follow, and I'm sure you'll be hearing right now.
I'm sorry, did she just say that he was an intelligence asset? We were reliably told that that is not true. I don't necessarily believe them, but didn't she say that? Wasn't that the story that's been going on forever? So why did they close the files? Why did they shut it down? So who's lying to us is really what I want to know. I just want to know real simply, did the DOJ and the FBI, the director, the deputy director, and the deputy attorney general get together, put together a memo and lie to the American people? Or does this woman not know what she's talking about, and now she's trying to get all kinds of things moving her direction? There was another clip. She was caught outside the steps where she decided to tell us that they were going to, she hasn't read the files that they've released. By the way, they're massively redacted and they're basically things that people already knew. But she hasn't read the files. There's 33,000 pages of them. Obviously, I haven't read all of them either. I'm kind of going on the summaries that I've seen. And based on what she thinks was done and based on interviewing victims like the ones we showed on the couch earlier, she's going to make a criminal referral possibly, and there needs to be a criminal investigation. I'm going to tell you why that sounds absurd to me. And then our opportunities are one of these people doesn't know what the hell's going on.
Well, there's 33,000 pages that have been released. I have to at least look over some of them. I'd like to get through all of them before I decide whether or not I'm going to do that. But I think that they've basically released everything except for the victim information, which obviously we don't release that. One thing to note that today when we were actually talking to some of the victims, one of the women stated that at 14, when Epstein started to victimize her, that she has no recollection of some of the stuff that was done to her. She's hoping to find that out so that she can actually bring it to her therapist and continue the healing process in regards to the damage and the trauma that was caused to her. So, but from what I'm being told, from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of very wealthy, bad people. It's actually scary to hear some of the stuff that was brought forward. And so I think the only way to collectively attack this is as a group and as a whole, meaning that Democrats and Republicans have to work together and back home or subpoenas, because I think this is going to be pretty hairy.
Is there more information beyond these 33,000 pages?
Well, there's going to be names. The attorneys kept emphasizing you need to follow up on the names. These girls are not just making this up. These are some of the wealthiest people probably in the world. And we'll start from there.
So they named individual people that are part of this.
Apparently, in these files that just dropped, I have not been able to look over all the files. Again, there's 33,000
I'm talking about
pages
in the meeting.
There are some people named, yes.
Were there any public officials that they named?
No, but very, very wealthy people have been named.
Can you name them?
They told us not to because they don't want those people to start basically burning files. So I think this is going criminal investigation for sure. I will say that what's been released, obviously the American people have wanted for a long time. Kudos to the DOJ for getting it to us. I know that some of the delay was due to redacting victim information, and so we'll see where it goes from here.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I think there's going to be a criminal investigation for sure. That's what she said. Is it hard to listen to that for you guys too? I don't get it. Again, Florida, shame on you. You're electing people that are pretty, but perhaps the background of being a former cocktail waitress at a strip club and taking pictures in patriotic bathing suits is not good enough for them to be good representatives. And what sort of, like, are they doing investigations? She sat in with victims and then she went in and was like, oh, like that, oh, for sure. Like they just named people. So like, that's it. Like they definitely have really powerful people, super powerful, not politicians. Nobody that you would be really worried about specifically, but also like an intelligence asset, but like also like everything that I've heard Alex Jones talk about. Pretty much. Like no specifics for you. I'm sorry. I'm conflicted because then I've also read what the DOJ said about it. Through this thorough review, we found no basis to revisit the disclosure of those materials and will not permit the release of child pornography, which is what they claim was in a lot of these video files. The systematic review revealed no incriminating quote unquote client list. Seemed like that's what she was talking about. She's talking about an abuser list. Let's continue on with this memo. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. There are 3 individual statements in here, and I'm going to break them down for you very specifically. The first one, a systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. What that tells us is, from what the DOJ's claims are, true or false is irrelevant. Their claim is that they did not have some sort of people paid and then got access to young women. So this would be the trafficking to others story. The DOJ says no. I guarantee you that the files that they released did not say otherwise, because that's not how DOJ does business. Even if they did have those, they wouldn't show them and show that they were full of it, because then you would destroy the credibility of Todd Blanche. You destroy the credibility of Kash Patel, Dan Bongino. If anything, the DOJ protects DOJ and FBI. That's what they do. Ask me how I know. The second line is that there's no credible evidence found that he blackmailed prominent individuals. So there are individual charges being levied, right? If you remember the Epstein allegations, we're talking about Intel asset. And what would he do with that? He could compromise people by having them pay and then know that they paid for sex with young girls. That would be part one. The second thing would be that he videotaped them without their knowledge, and he could blackmail them because, let's say, they were married, or maybe he was involved in some sort of homosexual activity or something that would be compromising visually. So then you have the idea of blackmail. Blackmail is different than paying for trafficked sex. One of them, commercial sex. The other one would be the blackmail material. They say no to all of that. And then lastly, this is the key, because for what the DOJ says, whatever Anna Paulina Luna said is absurd and stupid from this last sentence. Because there's no chance that they put this out and they're going to turn around and go back on themselves with this. They had this material. She just said DOJ released this material. This wasn't material that was like magically turned over by somebody else. This is not novel or new. This is governmental information. And what they said was, quote, "We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties." Evidence against uncharged third parties does not exist in this statement. Predicate an investigation just means like probable cause to believe. Actually, the level of predication for a criminal investigation for the FBI to undertake it, or any of the federal law enforcement agencies, all they have to do is they have to substantiate that there is allegation or information that a federal crime took place. They can do it based on the victim, they can do it based on the act, and they can do it based on the subject that they believe actually engaged in it. Any one of those three things are predicates. So that's very specific, kind of like the way the FBI plays ball. And now you've got this girl, and I'm just going to call her a girl because she sounds like a girl. She sounds like a high schooler saying like, oh, for sure, there's going to be criminals. That's what's happening. There's a lot of unserious people out there. And this is certainly, in my experience, like one of the most unserious things. Get distracted by Epstein again. Now we're the heroes again. Well, what are we distracting from? That's what I always want to know. One of them is I think the discussion about medical institutions that we no longer trust. I'm going to play you two little things and I'm going to close the argument, because the COVID argument, which I started yesterday, and broadly speaking, pharmaceutical interventions as a solution to a lot of our problems. I actually think that as Americans continue to open their eyes up and go like, the government lies to me about everything else. Why would they lie to me about things like FDA studies? Why would they lie to me about CDC studies? Oh, because they did already? We already saw this? This is News Nation. This is a discussion. This is our FDA commissioner talking about whether or not vaccine injuries exist. I played you the RFK thing the other day and sort of the joke. It was a punchline for Jimmy Dore. Then it was like not a punchline, but it turned out to be a laugh line for RFK Jr. talking to Bill Maher. This is not a laugh, because a lot of people, including people in this audience, had their lives destroyed by either taking this shot or getting this disease. And I know that because I've talked to you about it. And it wasn't just the mandates that went down. It was the taking of that thing in good faith. I think plenty of people took that shot thinking it was a good idea because they actually listened to experts. And now we're finding out how diabolical that really was. And I think it's much bigger than that.
But we should note that vaccine injury and, God forbid, vaccine deaths have been a very, very small minority of the hundreds of millions of people who've taken this vaccine.
Hundreds of thousands of Americans describe vaccine injury. 25% of clinicians know of somebody that's been significantly disabled or died from a vaccine. I know of 3 people who have died from the COVID vaccine, not personally, but through a physician or friend that has had a first-degree contact with someone who has had a vaccine complication. We know there's a risk of myocarditis in young, healthy men. That's 1 in 2,600 young boys. So, when people use these blanket terms, they're ignoring the very nuanced question in medical science, and that is, do the benefits outweigh the risks? That is the question. Not let's blindfold ourselves and insist that everybody take this. Look at the last administration, rubber stamping COVID boosters every year with no updated clinical trial. And we said we're not going to keep going down this road. We don't believe in COVID vaccine boosters forever unless we have evidence to support it. We're bringing back gold standard science and common sense.
That seems totally reasonable. Forget what the network is that's calling it. I don't care about who is it. This is the person that is in charge of the FDA. So that's Marty Makary, the physician who runs FDA. If that's the claim, that we know that there is a significant number of vaccine injured, that there's a significant number of complications that exist, that he personally has experienced, like all of you probably do as well. I heard that there was an FBI agent that got hit with a shot. I listened to the crying testimony of his wife. The day after the shot, he went home and died. Do normal 40-something-year-old healthy males who get annual physicals normally just keel over and die from a flu that comes out of nowhere? Not usually. No, they don't. But it's opened up the question. How many of these institutions are completely full of it? Doesn't matter whether it's government institutions giving you 33,000 files that are redacted on a case that's already closed that won't go anywhere, and saying that, oh, there's very, very powerful people, no specifics. In the Intel world, we call that NFI. I was actually talking to Bill Taylor about this. We were kind of laughing. Bill Taylor was our Sunday sit down for last week and will be this week again. NFI is like an allegation that's completely unsubstantiated. I'll tell you something really wild. A bunch of really wealthy people did this thing. Well, who are they? NFI. No further information. Okay. That's what we're getting. And how many people have gone out there and started asking questions about the other pharmaceuticals? Again, I was in my maybe mid 30s when I went into the VA, and the nurse who was doing the intake said, what medicines do you take every day? I was like, none. And she was like, no, I mean, like, what prescriptions do you have? It's like, none. There's no other way you can ask this question, lady. And she was like, what pills do you have to take when you throughout the day? It's like, lady, first of all, I'm a paramedic, so I know about medicine, probably have as much pharmaceutical understanding as you. Second of all, what are you asking me? I'm like in my 30s. I don't take medicine. But before I went off to the FBI, I was, 35 years old, and they were trying to prescribe me a statin. So I started looking at a lot of these things in the same critical way that many of you are. And I know a lot of people that are in my parents' age bracket. Some of you are in that bracket. If you're in your 60s and your 70s, and you've been taking a drug for 20 years, many of you are asking, like, what the hell is the foundation of why we're doing this? And almost a huge chunk of them are correlation without being able to establish causation, and they just went with it. So here's a story about statins. I've got another one about SSRIs. Again, I think we are reevaluating the institutions, and I actually think that's a net good, but it's going to cause some real upheaval in this country. And then the last thing is we're evaluating our own decisions. So that's where we're going to get to the end with the COVID argument.
The government actually did a bunch of randomized controlled clinical trials on tens of thousands of people, testing to see if saturated fat and cholesterol caused heart disease. They actually took groups of people, and they did this in mental hospitals where they totally controlled what people ate. And half the people they gave, meat, butter, cheese, regular high saturated fat and cholesterol diet, and half the people they, gave them soy-filled cheese and margarine instead of butter and soy-filled meat. And in those rigorous experiments on tens of thousands of people, they could not show that the people eating the meat and the butter and the cheese died at higher rates from heart disease. In fact, they showed in one of the most famous experiments called the Minnesota Coronary Survey on 9,000 men and women over 4.5 years, they found the more the men lowered their cholesterol, the more likely they were to die of a heart attack. So what happened to all those experiments? They were not, that particular experiment wasn't published for 16 years. Other experiments I found sat in NIH, National Institute of Health basement, never published, ignored, not included, just ignored or suppressed. It's like out of a crime novel.
It's crazy.
And so what was the American Heart Association doing? Ignoring all those clinical trials.
Isn't that troubling? Because if it doesn't fit your data and it's going to cost you a bunch of money, then maybe you just don't have that study. It's like, well, we are not going. That's an inconvenient study. That's not science, which is the kind of argument that people were making about a lot of the stuff that was going on. If people died at a 23% higher rate because they took a shot, you start asking some real questions. Well, that doesn't serve our financial interests, so you're just going to exclude that? Again, same story I have with SSRIs, and I think I'm not alone in that. This is another Tucker Carlson interview. That was a Joe Rogan, rather. This is a Tucker Carlson interview. This is an Australian doctor who is a psychiatrist by training, and he's talking about, going to work for a big pharmaceutical company that was associated with Johnson & Johnson. I think it's their subsidiary called Jensen. And he's talking about SSRI numbers, which sound also really sketch.
You can stick needles into people's spine, and you can draw out fluid, and you can look at the metabolites of things like serotonin, and you can get depressed people and undepressed people and say, is there any difference in the actual amount of serotonin floating around in the brain? Every time they've done this, they have not found that there is any difference between depressed and undepressed people. But
there's no difference?
There is no difference. Because that's why we don't use any biological markers in the diagnosis of any psychiatric conditions. No brain scans, no blood tests. They're not useful because there are no ways, like actual biological ways to differentiate depressed people from undepressed people.
Are you serious?
Absolutely. And the way they justify it was, well, okay, so we haven't found it yet, but it must be a medical problem and we're eventually going to find it. And rather than admitting that, in the meantime, we'll just tell people it's a chemical imbalance because it's just an easy kind of like metaphor for them to understand. And it helps us dish out the drugs without people asking too many questions.
But it's
Right. But it might be untrue. Full disclosure, he also works in a clinic where they step people off SSRIs. So he offers alternatives and gets people out of those things. So he has a financial interest, obviously, in the position that he's holding. That being said, it reminds me of people like Sean Baker. And you guys may be familiar with Sean Baker, who does meatheals, I think, .com or meatheals.us. And he was an orthopedic surgeon who kept seeing people that were, injured and destroyed and their bodies were all jacked up. And he's like a super freakish animal with a high performance at every level in every sport that he's ever done. And he's a world record holder, indoor rower, and, dunks a basketball. And he's massive and he's freakishly, unique. And yet he went out there and said, well, I don't want to be an orthopedic surgeon who goes out and repairs a bunch of bodies that are damaged. I want to help people not be sick. And so he does this sort of carnivore diet. He's a proponent of that. And he's a freakishly big guy, if you guys ever seen him. He played, professional rugby and Scottish Highland games and does all these other kind of crazy things. Deadlifts 500 pounds, over 50 years old and all this stuff. But there's something to be said for people who are doctors that want to say, maybe the traditional quote unquote Western medicine model is not for me. So I'm open to hearing that. And I also continue to see a lot of these problems, they're institution problems. All of that leads me to the COVID question, again, which so many of us saw right up front, and the vote with your feet argument, which is to say, if you leave places where people don't think the way you do and act irrationally, at least according to your values and beliefs, then you can hyper-concentrate in places where you will get the outcomes that you want. We're just hearing right now that Governor Ron DeSantis is talking about signing into law, if they can pass it, a complete revocation of all property taxes in Florida. That would be the first state in the nation to get rid of property taxes and allow you to actually own something that you quote unquote own instead of leasing it from the government every single year at threat of being taken away. That would be a real game changer when it comes to actual sort of conservative ideas and rolling back the clock for what things used to be in this country. You can get that when you hyper concentrate a bunch of people that are semi-like-minded and they all want to go to one place. So this is a Democratic representative, this is Moskowitz, talking to Chuck Todd and saying, I'm not sure that we can win this back in the short term. That's what you want to do. Don't fight for nominal weak victories when you can get complete victories and you can devastate the opponents, which are doing things that are completely illogical, like grand jury notification for fighting federal troops, or they just want to continue bad gun policies, even though there's no obvious answer to it in the way they're doing it.
COVID was a seminal moment in politics. Even though we had more Democrats in Florida, registered Democrats in Florida, when Rick Scott got elected, when DeSantis got elected, when Jeb Bush got elected, when Charlie Crist got elected, we still had more Democrats, but we were still electing Republican governors. Okay. Now there are 1.2 million more registered Republicans. It's starting to get to a point that it's not recoverable, at least not in the short term. Okay. But I think COVID was a big piece of it. I think COVID was a big piece, and I was there. I was involved in it on the other side. I think, and I have.
How did Joe Biden only lose by 3 points then?
How did he only lose?
He lost Florida in 2020 by just 3 points.
Well, I mean, again, as Joe Biden would say, don't judge me against the almighty, judge me against the alternative.
Can I just stop right there and say one thing? Because he's going to talk about the strong victory of Donald Trump in 2024. How did he only lose by 3 points? Maybe we shouldn't have any mail-in ballots, and maybe there was some serious fraud in that particular election. I think a lot of us have that instinct because you're going to hear that the alternative, he won it in 2016, Trump did. Then he won it again in both, but he was the smallest margin in 2020. Why was that? It was because Joe Biden was such a great candidate. Anybody?
And so 2020, right, we were still mid-COVID, okay? And, people wanted a change. They wanted a change. Right. And so that was a mood politic. OK, meanwhile, Ron DeSantis won his reelection in Florida by 19 points and Donald Trump just won Florida by 13 points.
Yeah.
OK, so the policies that came out of COVID, closing of schools, the fact that Florida opened schools early because the data was clear. It wasn't spreading in schools. Right. That's a big piece, Chuck. I mean, and I was telling my Democratic colleagues, like, guys, read the data. Like, I would sit at a conference table with the governor. We'd be reading the data from Denmark, right, and Germany and Europe, because they were ahead of us, and it was clear it wasn't spreading in the schools. Okay. And I said to my Democratic colleagues, I'm like, when we open schools, it's going to be very popular. When you guys come out and tell parents you want to keep their kids in the house for another year, okay, I'm telling you, this is where this is going. And
if you're not data driven, and if you understand that the entire purpose of an institution is to educate children, and all you care about are the people that work there, and you basically go out there and try to get them a paycheck without having to go to work, which is what happened, why would you stick around for that? Why would you be there? A lot of people moved to Florida. Florida grew dramatically, and that red wave that crushed in through and lifted Ron DeSantis up to the almost 20-point victory, it was still there earlier. It was concentrating, though. And so as you concentrate good ideas, you get rid of the bad ideas. The bad ideas don't have any ability to proliferate. That is actually a solution. Moving. Go figure. A lot of people will tell you not to do that. Stay and fight where you are. Oh, if you love California, stick around. You're insane. You're an insane person at this point. It's not a winnable battle. The crazy people move there. They vote crazy. Whether they steal it or not, if you don't control with paper ballots that you can actually go out there and check out, what are you doing? You're voting into a black hole, and you're giving the people who empower the ability to keep going, and you're paying for it. So anyway, I do think that's the solution. And it's coming from Democrats who are talking about it. Whatever it's worth, I think we should consider it. I want to do one last little thing here because it's kind of fun. I've been gone down a bunch of different little weird rabbit holes in the last little bit. Last night, a friend of mine and I decided to keep asking this question, and there are many, many articles that ask the same question. Who is Alexis Wilkin, Kash Patel's girlfriend, unveiling the enigmatic life of a rising star in country? And we kept trying to figure out, who is Alexis Wilkin? She apparently was born in Boston and then lived in Europe until she was 9, between England and Switzerland. And then she came back and she found herself in Arkansas. And then she, from Arkansas, by the age of 16, she went to Nashville and she became this country singer. And that's the story. And so, that's the story on every website. It's the story on all of the articles. I've looked in the Hollywood Life. I've looked in the Knowers Inside. I've looked at the Times of India. I've looked at dozens of sources of information. And they all tell me that she's this super talented, pretty, sweet, all-American girl who grew up in a country area. She listened to country her whole life. That's why she has no accent. And she was in Arkansas, where country lives and breathes and propagates. And then suddenly afterwards, she moved to Nashville, and then she was able to become a star, although no one's ever heard any of her music. I'll just argue that that's the case because I listen to country music, including female vocalists, and I've never heard it. Would it be weird to find out that she's not really that great of a singer? You guys ever listen to professionals? I guess they have off days. You ever heard anybody pop in and grab the microphone at a Southwest Airlines terminal and sing to the terminal and then wish they had changed the key? I did. Through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watch, were so gallantly streaming. Anyway, so she only misses like probably about a half dozen notes in that little short clip. Anyway, no big deal. That's what normal people do. They go up there. If you're a professional singer, what you do is you take advantage of any audience. You go grab the microphone at Southwest Airlines on Veterans Day, and then you go ahead and sing your heart out into whatever that was, because you know one song really well. I've seen her sing the national anthem like 4 times online. That seems to be the thing she's really interested in. Would it surprise you to learn that she attended dozens of industry parties in Los Angeles, starting at the age of 9? She seemed to be in Los Angeles all the time. I have pictures of her at all kinds of these crazy young actress things, that she was actually an actress on Modern Family, that she was an actress in some sci-fi movie where she was like part of a horror film. It's really strange, folks. You start looking into this gal, which I didn't previously do because I wasn't particularly interested. I don't really care who the FBI director dates, but I do care about people who lie about their background. It seems strange to me to say that you're Arkansas bred and Nashville based, but you spent an awful lot of time, dozens and dozens and dozens of appearances from the age of 9 until the age of like 16 years old in Los Angeles, and you're always described as an actress. A lot of pictures of her with older guys, though. So that might be her thing. I can't actually rule it out. Pictures of her with Aaron Carter when he's in his late 20s and she's in her early teens. You know, weird stuff. I don't like looking at people and figuring out how strange their life is. I don't like looking sort of deeply and finding out that they're all kinds of, publicly pushed lies. But what I also found really crazy was that all of these stories asking who she is have nothing to say except the official line that comes out of her bio. Not one person looked even deeper. She has an Instagram account that goes back years. She's got YouTube appearances. You could just type her name in there and find times when she's interviewed when she's 12 years old. Her favorite songs were like One Republic and Drops of Jupiter, nothing about country until she decided she was a country singer. Anyway, sometimes you find that people are inconsistent because they do things that are inconsistent. Sometimes there's a reason for hiding your background. I don't know what that stuff is. I do know that it's very strange to get a lawsuit from somebody 5 days after I said something that I've already clarified. Anyway, I've archived all this stuff. We'll continue to play with it. It's frustrating because it's been a burden to deal with, and a burden from who? Like some rando chick who has no background and then turns out like she's got a ton of background. I found all kinds of stuff about her online, and all of it is odd, including the reporters that reached out and said, hey, super odd. We'll talk more about that soon, I'm sure. I'm sure there'll be more of this. This will probably be a social media thing and not a podcast thing. But thank you so much for joining the program. I hope you took something away. I hope the argument sits with you well, that if you're living in a place where you're like, I'm not free, you make that change, you vote with your feet. And then you also look at people and say, is this an honest actor? Is this person just a theater child who wants attention? Or are they trying to act honestly? Go watch the new campaign video that Thomas Massey just dropped out, by the way. It's pretty good. He says, I will not be a thespian in a theater of crazy or something to that effect. And I went like, yep, that's what it's all about. You guys can support us by following us over on YouTube. I actually hate Rumble. Every time I deal with Rumble every morning, it has a new problem and they all suck. So if you guys want to follow us over on YouTube, I'd appreciate that. You'll move over from Rumble. It's unfortunate, but they also kind of take money out of us, and I can show you guys the numbers over on Locals. Follow us on Locals if you want. That's a Rumble product, so you can still focus and put your money there with those guys. It's a good way for us to interact, and I appreciate you guys there. Subscribe, like the video, etc. And then if you want to see it on Spotify, or if you're listening on somewhere and you're thinking, hey, sometimes I want to see the visuals while I'm listening, check out Spotify. It's free on Spotify. It will not cost you a penny. You actually get less ads, I think, on the Spotify. Just go to KyleSerafinshow.com, and if you type that in, it will take you directly to our Spotify little like cheat code. You can download the app. You can even watch it on the website. So that's the request. Thanks so much for listening today. I look forward to seeing you guys again tomorrow, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram @Kyle Seraphin.